The Caribbean Sea has always been a place of duality. To the average person, it is a postcard. It is turquoise water, white sand, cruise ships, and the promise of paradise. It is where you go to forget the world. But to the United States government, the Caribbean has never been a vacation destination. It is a backdoor. It is the soft underbelly of the American empire. It is a transit zone where, for centuries, the things that America fears have tried to creep in. First, it was Soviet missiles in Cuba. Then, it was ideologies like communism. And for the last 40 years, it has been white powder. We are all familiar with the images of the drug war. We know the rhythm of it. It's a cat and mouse game. A Coast Guard cutter spots a low-riding speedboat, a go-fast. They deploy a helicopter. They fire a warning shot across the bow. The smugglers dump the bales of cocaine into the water. The boat stops. The officers board. They wrestle men in t-shirts to the deck, cuff them, and haul them off to a federal holding cell in Miami or San Juan. It is a police action. It involves lawyers, judges, evidence, and due process. It is law enforcement performed on the high seas. It ended with a silence, followed by a flash of light. The boat was indistinguishable from thousands of other fishing boats that dot the Caribbean every day. It had no flag. It had a crew of 4. Intelligence suggested it was carrying a shipment of fentanyl precursors bound for a transfer point in Honduras. But the operator controlling that drone wasn't sitting in a Coast Guard station. They were sitting in a container in Nevada, operating under a new set of rules known as Operation Southern Spear. There was no radio hail. The operator simply sought confirmation from the kill chain, received it, and released a Hellfire missile. The boat didn't just sink, it was vaporized. The wood splintered into toothpicks. The engine block melted. The 4 men on board were not arrested. They were deleted. This was not a police action. This was an act of war, and it was just the first shot. Since that day in September, the United States Navy has effectively turned the Caribbean Sea into a free fire zone. We are witnessing the most significant shift in American military posture in the Western Hemisphere since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and almost nobody is talking about the reality of what this means. We are told this is about drugs. We are told this is about protecting American citizens from the poison of fentanyl. You don't send an aircraft carrier to fight a drug dealer. You don't deploy nuclear submarines to hunt for wooden fishing boats. Something much darker and much more dangerous is happening in the waters south of Florida. The United States has started a war in the Caribbean, a war without a declaration, a war without an exit strategy, and a war that is currently targeting a group of people that the government has decided no longer have the right to exist. We are going to deconstruct the legal machinery that allows a president to order a missile strike on a boat full of civilians. We are going to look at the shadow war being fought against the Venezuelan state. And we are going to ask the question that Washington is terrified to answer. What happens when the people we are shooting at decide to shoot back? This is not just semantics. This is the difference between life and death. The state has to catch you, prove you did it, and then punish you. Even if you are a mass murderer, even if you are a cartel kingpin who has dissolved bodies in acid, you have rights. You cannot be executed by a drone while you are sleeping. That is the social contract of a civilized society. But there is a loophole. There is a category of person who has no rights. There is a category of person who can be killed on sight, without warning and without evidence presented to a judge. That category is the enemy combatant. When the United States is at war, the rules of law enforcement are suspended and the laws of armed conflict take over. In a war, you don't arrest the enemy soldier, you kill them. You bomb their barracks. You sink their ships. You do not need to read them their Miranda rights before you drop a JDAM on their head. Presidents like to call it a war because it sounded tough, but legally it was a police effort. The military could help, they could provide radar, they could provide surveillance, but they could not pull the trigger. That was the line in the sand. The Posse Comitatus Act and various Department of Defense directives kept the military from becoming a police force. While the media was distracted by the inauguration and the cabinet appointments, the White House issued a new national security directive. This directive designated specific transnational criminal organizations, most notably the Venezuelan prison gang Tren de Aragua, as foreign terrorist organizations or FTOs. But in the post-9/11 world, That label is a weapon. By designating a drug cartel as a terrorist organization, the administration unlocked the powers of the 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force, or AUMF. It was a blank check. It allowed the president to use all necessary and appropriate force against those who planned the attacks. But over the last 24 years, that law has been stretched, twisted, and contorted to justify wars in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Niger, and Libya. It has become the skeleton key of American imperialism. Now, that key has been inserted into the Caribbean. The legal argument the Trump administration is making is breathtaking in its audacity. They are arguing that because cartels use violence to achieve political destabilization, and because their product fentanyl kills Americans, they are functionally indistinguishable from ISIS. Therefore, they are not criminals. They are terrorists. And the teenage kid driving the boat? He isn't a mule. He's an enemy combatant. In the eyes of the law, he was shooting at a soldier on a battlefield. The Caribbean Sea is no longer international waters governed by maritime law. It is an active theater of war, legally identical to the mountains of Afghanistan in 2002. Now comes the steal. In August 2025, the Pentagon announced the deployment of Operation Southern Spear. The press release was full of the usual jargon about interdiction and regional security, but the list of assets deployed tells a very different story. Ford. This is the newest, most expensive, most powerful warship ever built by human hands. It costs $13 billion. It carries 75 aircraft. It is powered by 2 nuclear reactors. It is a city of destruction floating on the sea. Alongside the Ford, the Navy deployed 3 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, the USS Jack H. Lucas, the USS Ted Stevens, and the USS Jeremiah Denton. These ships are designed to shoot down satellites and track ballistic missiles. Beneath the surface, there is at least one Virginia-class attack submarine, a silent predator capable of listening to a whale's heartbeat from miles away. 10,000 sailors and Marines have been surged into the region. You have to pause and ask the question, why? Why do you need a nuclear submarine to find a semi-submersible built out of fiberglass in a jungle in Colombia? The cartels are powerful, yes. They have money. They have rifles. They have homemade submarines. But they do not have an air force. They do not have a navy. They do not have ballistic missiles. Sending a carrier strike group to fight Tren de Aragua is like using a sledgehammer to kill a mosquito. It works, sure, but it destroys the drywall, the table, and the floor in the process. Unless, of course, the mosquito isn't the target. You don't build a force this big unless you are preparing for state-on-state conflict. This fleet isn't positioned to catch smugglers. It is positioned to impose a blockade. We have verified 22 separate missile strikes. The official death toll, according to the Pentagon, is 87 enemy combatants. But who counts the dead? Who verifies that the 87 people vaporized in the middle of the ocean were actually cartel members? In the middle of the Caribbean, there are no witnesses. The only footage comes from the nose camera of the drone that fired the missile. The Pentagon releases what it wants us to see, grainy black and white clips of boats exploding. They don't show us what happens before. They don't show us the bodies floating in the water afterwards. And this brings us to the darkest rumor currently circulating in the halls of Congress. The testimony was given behind closed doors, but leaks had begun to trickle out to outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post. These leaks concern the rules of engagement, or REE. In every war, the REE dictates when you can shoot. Usually, the rules are restrictive. You have to be fired upon. You have to identify a weapon. You have to ensure there are no civilians. This means they aren't waiting to see drugs. They aren't waiting to see guns. They are looking at behavior. Is a boat moving at night? Is it running without lights? Is it on a known trafficking vector? If the answer is yes, the computer flags it as a target. Fishermen also use the same currents that smugglers use because that's where the water moves fastest. The report alleges that after the first missile hit the boat, the drone's sensors picked up 2 heat signatures in the water. 2 survivors. They were clinging to a piece of the hull. They were alive. In a law enforcement operation, this is a rescue mission. In a standard military operation, these men are hors de combat out of the fight. Killing them is a war crime under the Geneva Convention. But the report claims that a kinetic strike order was given to sanitize the target. The drone fired a second missile. The heat signatures disappeared. Why would the US military double-tap a drowning man? You have to interrogate them. They get lawyers. They talk to the press. They might reveal that they were just fishermen paid $50 to carry a package, or worse, that they weren't carrying anything at all. Dead men don't go on CNN. This is the reality of the new strategy. It is a strategy of attrition. The goal is not justice. The goal is terror. The Trump administration wants to make the Caribbean so dangerous, so lethal, that no captain in South America will agree to pilot a drug boat. They want to create a zone of death where the risk of vaporization outweighs the profit of the payload. It is a strategy of brutality. And history tells us that strategies of brutality rarely work against the drug trade. They just force the trade to evolve. Let's look at the economics for a moment. A kilo of fentanyl cost a few $1,000s to produce in a lab in Colombia or Mexico. By the time it hits the streets of Chicago or Philadelphia, it is worth hundreds of thousands. The profit margin is better than Apple, better than Tesla, better than Nvidia. When you have a product with that kind of profit margin, and a market with insatiable demand, you cannot bomb the supply chain into submission. We tried this in Vietnam with the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We bombed that jungle until the earth turned to glass. The trucks kept moving. We tried it in Colombia in the 90s. We sprayed the coca fields with glyphosate. The farmers just moved the crops into the national parks. They are abandoning the 12-meter wooden boats, the low-hanging fruit that the drones are picking off. They are shifting investment into semi-submersibles. These are low-profile vessels that sit mostly underwater, made of fiberglass to minimize radar signature. They are hard to build and dangerous to pilot, but now they are necessary. Even more concerning, they are shifting to parasitic smuggling. This is where divers weld the torpedo-shaped container filled with drugs to the hull of a legitimate oil tanker or container ship below the waterline. The ship's captain doesn't even know it's there. Are they going to fire a Hellfire missile at a Chinese-owned container ship carrying 10,000 Toyotas just because there might be a metal tube welded to the keel? Of course not. That would start World War III. So, the zone of death strategy has a ceiling. It kills the small-time independent contractors. It kills the fishermen. It kills the expendable crews. But it does not stop the flow. The big organizations, the ones with the capital to innovate, will survive. They will just charge more for the product to cover the risk premium. So if the strategy is economically illiterate and legally dubious and morally bankrupt, why are we doing it? Why is the aircraft carrier there? To find the truth, you have to take your eyes off the water and look at the land. You have to look at Venezuela. For 20 years, Washington has been obsessed with Venezuela. It's not just because the government is socialist. It's not just because Nicolas Maduro is an autocrat. It's because Venezuela sits on top of the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia. And right now, that oil is controlled by a government that hates the United States and is allied with Russia and China. He imposed sanctions. They failed. Maduro is still there. He is entrenched. But now, Trump has a new angle. He has linked the Venezuelan state to the drug trade. He has claimed that the gang Tren de Aragua is not just a criminal group, but an arm of the Maduro regime. He calls it narco-terrorism. If you claim that the government of Venezuela is actively partnering with terrorists to poison Americans with fentanyl, you have a casus belli. You have a cause for war. It is a blockade. Look at where the ships are. They are parked off the Venezuelan coast. They are choking off the maritime access of the country. By shooting at drug boats, the U.S. is effectively warning all maritime traffic, stay away. Insurance rates for ships entering Venezuelan waters have skyrocketed in the last 3 months. Commercial shipping is drying up. The goal is to strangle the Maduro economy, to starve the regime of cash until the military generals turn on him. It is a siege disguised as a drug bust. And this is where the danger lies, because a siege is an act of war. Maduro knows this. He isn't stupid. He sees the aircraft carrier, he sees the drones, and he is reacting. He has mobilized his own military. He has deployed Russian-made S-300 air defense systems to the coast. He has put his Sukhoi fighter jets on high alert. The U.S. drone operator in Nevada thinks he sees a drug boat. He fires. But what if he makes a mistake? What if he hits a Venezuelan Navy patrol boat? What if he hits a civilian ferry? Maduro has already warned that any attack on Venezuelan sovereignty will be met with fire and fury. If a U.S. missile hits a Venezuelan government asset, Maduro will be forced to respond. He might fire a shore-based anti-ship missile at a U.S. destroyer. If that happens, the USS Gerald R. Ford will not hesitate. It will unleash its air wing. We will see cruise missiles raining down on Caracas. We will see air battles over the Caribbean. We will see a full-scale war in our hemisphere. And for what? To stop a gang that operates in prisons? Was one final, terrifying aspect to this story. It is the precedent we are setting. If the United States says it is okay to blow up a boat in international waters because we suspect it contains criminals, we are rewriting the rules of the world. They are criminals. They are threatening our security. And then China starts drone-striking Taiwanese boats in the South China Sea. At what happens if Russia says, these ships in the Black Sea are smuggling weapons to terrorists in Ukraine and starts sinking grain ships? They will point to Operation Southern Spear. They will say, we are just doing what you did. We are normalizing the idea that a superpower can execute civilians outside of its borders simply by labeling them a threat. We are normalizing the idea that the ocean is not a commons, but a killing field owned by the strongest navy. They are watching the waves roll in. They see the beauty. They are waiting for the buzz of a drone. They know that at any moment they could cease to exist. Some of them are criminals, yes. Some of them are trafficking poison. But they are human beings. And the system we have built, the system of laws and courts and rights, was designed to handle them. We built that system because the alternative is barbarism. We chose the execution over the trial. But mostly, it is a war against the very idea of the rule of law. Donald Trump promised to end the forever wars. He promised to bring the troops home from the Middle East. And perhaps he has. But he didn't end the war machine. He just brought it closer to home. He brought it to our doorstep. And the thing about wars on your doorstep is that eventually the fire spreads inside the house. We are going to look at the specific gang Tren de Aragua that Trump claims is worse than ISIS. We are going to investigate the mysterious connection between the Venezuelan government and the cartels. And we are going to ask the question, is this all a setup for a land invasion? And the first casualties are already drifting in the current, waiting to be found.